Hello, my name is Skylar.
And my name is Tyler. I pay respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation where Dad's podcast is recorded.
I live on Bunjil land. I believe Bunjil is the creator of land, of our first peoples. He is the creator of the land of where I am right now.
I pay my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
This land always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Hello and welcome to Over the Rainbow, a podcast series dedicated to all things rainbow dads. This is Murray, I'm your host, and today I'm joined in the studio with Sarah Jefford, a leading family creation lawyer in Australia practicing in surrogacy and donor conception. I've had a few guests on my show that have mentioned Sarah, so I thought it would probably be a good idea to look her up and reach out to her to come on to my show. Sarah has done a lot in the space of surrogacy. She's published a book, More Than Just a Baby, a guide to surrogacy for intended parents and surrogates, which serves as a comprehensive guide to surrogacy in Australia. She has her own podcast show, the Surrogacy Podcast, with an impressive 100 episodes to date. Sarah was awarded an OAM in 2023 for her services to law and her work within the surrogacy community, and she's even been a surrogate herself, helping to create a family for two rainbow dads. She has done it all. Listen to the chat, I really enjoyed it, and I think if you're going down the surrogacy pathway, this is a really invaluable chat to have under your belt. Hello and welcome to Over the Rainbow, a podcast series dedicated to all things rainbow dads. Now, you heard my introduction. I am so fortunate to be joined with Sarah Jefford, who is a family creation lawyer specialising in surrogacy and donor conception law. Sarah, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's such a privilege to talk about surrogacy with you today.
And we're just so fortunate to have you. Now, just to recap your many accolades, you have your own podcast series where you've got 100 under your belt called the Australian Surrogacy Podcast. You've written a book called More Than Just a Baby. You were a surrogate to a gay couple. You have an OAM. Wow, talk about an overachiever.
I know, right? I think that's how my parents described me. Honestly, it's been a privilege because being a lawyer means you kind of get pigeonholed into just doing lawyer work, but things like the podcast and the book and being a surrogate allows me to do things that really fill my heart and are creative and, makes the legal stuff actually more interesting.
Well, I mean, isn't that amazing? Because on your website, you've actually got a YouTube video where you introduce yourself. And just touching on that, you've been able to marry your professional career to something, a love. And isn't that what all people should try and aim to do in life? Absolutely.
I used to be a divorce lawyer, and that was really fulfilling and rewarding, but it was also really hard and stressful. Yeah. And these days I get to talk surrogacy with people, and it's these really heart-to-heart conversations with people about surrogacy and donor conception that I've also got lived experience. So it's just, it's incredible.
Incredible. And let's add to that list of accolades an all-around ally to the queer community.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been a real privilege. And I realise just when I say that I am privileged to be a straight cis woman who can, do my best to be an ally to the queer community. Yeah. And that includes being a surrogate to a gay couple, but also seeing them be a parent to their child and to know that I fully accept them in how they are and that may not be the case for everybody else.
For sure. All right, so let's get stuck into it because I feel like there's going to be a lot that we're going to cover. Specifically, let's talk about altruistic surrogacy and what that means. Can you give us your definition of it?
So we only have altruistic surrogacy in Australia. That's the only time that's legal, which really just means that the surrogate cannot be paid for handing over the baby. She cannot receive a fee or a reward or a new car in exchange for being your surrogate or handing you a baby. But she can have her expenses covered as long as they are associated with surrogacy or pregnancy or birth, which really means you're looking for somebody that is willing to do it for all the love and care and fulfillment of being a surrogate rather than for a payment at the end, which is what we see in commercial surrogacy. But I wanted to be careful about that because not all commercial surrogacy is the same. We actually know from studies done in America where commercial surrogacy is legal, they talk about it being more compensated surrogacy. But we know that the surrogates are actually motivated for altruistic reasons, even when money is involved. So,
good point.
Yeah, there's lots of different types of surrogacy, and I guess it's about being careful that just because we're talking about altruistic doesn't mean it's free, that the surrogate needs her expenses covered. And if we were talking commercial surrogacy, that doesn't mean that there's a lack of love or altruism in the act of being a surrogate.
For sure. Would you say that when you say expenses, is that a grey area or is that very defined?
Some of it's quite defined in that, again, it has to be actually associated with surrogacy or pregnancy or birth. It can't just be, the holiday that she needs to take while pregnant.
Yeah.
So if she needs to take time off work, the intended parents can cover her lost income, and they can cover things like maternity clothing and childcare expenses if she needs to go to the doctor, prenatal supplements, doctor's fees. It's somewhat defined, but it's also broad enough to know that each surrogate will be different. So the grey area, I guess, is about talking to your particular surrogate about what her expenses might be. We might have a surrogate that needs a pregnancy massage and the intended parents cover that, but somebody else says, I don't want a pregnancy massage, but I do need acupuncture or chiro, or I need more maternity clothing than the other surrogate. Those sorts of things are the sort of, I guess, the broad grey area that we have to work with.
And I mean, who's checking, who's auditing that, in terms of...
There's no real audits is what I say to people. We don't actually check. I am not particularly interested in checking people's bank statements. However, we do talk about making sure there is a record of what those expenses might be in case there is a judge that says, I would like to see expense accounts, I would like to see bank statements and maybe a spreadsheet on what those expenses were, just to confirm that it's not a commercial arrangement.
Gotcha.
But we're pretty relaxed about it in Australia. There's not really a question that it's altruistic. If we accept that, the intended parents paid for a massage, we're not going to go through their bank statements to make sure it was, exactly the same amount that the massage place charged for. Yeah.
So in terms of why do you think, just touching briefly, why do you think commercial surrogacy is illegal in Australia? Have you got, would that be your thoughts or is there a reason?
I think surrogacy has actually only been legal in Australia in the last decade and a half.
Oh, right, okay.
So it's still relatively new compared to, say, America, which has had it for a lot longer. I think because we started from the framework of surrogacy being illegal, when it was introduced in different states, they had to start from the premise, well, if we're going to let it happen, we can't have commercial surrogacy. We don't want, what they have overseas.
Gotcha.
I think that's a little bit problematic because it means that whenever we talk about law reform in Australia, everybody starts that it must continue to be altruistic and there's less room to talk about it becoming compensated.
Gotcha.
And I think that's potentially a problem that we still have well over 300 babies born every year for intended parents going overseas, and we only have about 120 surrogacy births in Australia. So if we're really concerned about people being allowed to do it here in Australia and able to do it, then maybe talking about compensated surrogacy in Australia is part of that discussion.
And do you think that will evolve over time? Do you think we'll get there, or if we look at other countries, were they in the same position?
No, I don't think so. I think a lot of the countries that have commercial surrogacy always had commercial.
Right. Yeah.
And them fighting to make it altruistic is actually the reverse discussion. I think I'd love to see a bigger discussion about compensated surrogacy in Australia, but it's a long haul because even when you mention money to people in surrogacy, a lot of people start with, oh, well, that's commodifying women and children. And I say, hey, it's not a 5-minute conversation. Let's have 5 hours of conversation. Yes. I do think it's interesting that the fertility industry makes a lot of money in surrogacy and fertility treatments. Lawyers and counsellors are paid, obstetric doctors are paid, but the surrogate has to do it unpaid. Like, why is that? Why do we not value her time and commitment and the risks that she takes in pregnancy? And we just think it should be an act of love, therefore she should be unpaid. And I think it can be both, that actually it is an act of love and some things can't really be compensated, but that valuing her time and the risks that she's taking is not a bad thing.
Wow, that's super interesting. So in terms of being able to advertise that you wanted to be a surrogate or to look for a surrogate within the altruistic frame, Can you do that?
Not really.
Not really.
Depends on the state.
So it makes it even harder.
Yeah, in several states it's actually illegal to advertise that you want to be a surrogate or to look for intended parents or to look for a surrogate. In other states it's not illegal to do that, but you can't pay for the advertisement, and you have to also be careful that you're not suggesting you would pay a surrogate, of course. But in Victoria it's completely illegal actually to even publish anything. So things like a podcast where I say I'd really like to be a surrogate is technically illegal in Victoria. It's not really policed, but it does mean it adds a layer of stigma and difficulty for people looking for a surrogate or an intended parent, that they can't even feel safe doing that on their own Facebook page, for example.
Well, I mean, so I would imagine a lot of the advertising and the sort of the networking and the linking up, if you don't already know that person, because there's a lot of people that I know that have done altruistic surrogacy, but the surrogate has been someone that they've known, would be through private Facebook groups. Yes,
that's right. So about 78% of my clients find a surrogate through existing networks. So it's friends and family.
Right.
A lot of them are friends or sisters, of course.
Yes.
If you don't have a friend or a sister that can offer, then the best option is a Facebook group. The Australian surrogacy community is probably the biggest, and about 22% of my clients reference social media as where they found their surrogate or intended parents. There's also state-based groups. So if you're in Victoria, we have a Victorian surrogacy group, but you can also find one for the other states as well. And you can come along to a catch-up. We'll have like a picnic or a brunch or a dinner where people can just mingle and get to know each other. And what I say to people is you might not find your surrogate, but you will find community, which is really important. You'll find other dads that are wanting to do surrogacy, or maybe they've already done surrogacy and they're sticking around because this is their community and they want to share that with other people.
Doesn't that just warm your heart that whenever there's a barrier put in the way, law and legislation, there's always that community spirit that overcomes that?
Yes.
Yeah. Incredible.
Some of these catch-ups are honestly, they warm my heart. They're the best thing ever, catching up with other people that have a shared experience or a shared goal, and they want to kind of put themselves out there and share it with other people. It's amazing.
I love that. Okay, so if there's listeners out there right now wondering if altruistic surrogacy in Australia is an option for them, let's maybe go through a step-by-step guide of what they need to consider. So you've got the thought bubble.
Yes.
What do you do after that?
So assuming that your listeners are mostly gay men, gay couples or single men, we know that they need a surrogate, and really the test there is, do either of them have a uterus? If the answer is no, then you qualify for surrogacy. Well done. If one of you does have a uterus, then it actually becomes a bit of a medical discussion about whether you can carry or not, and you'd be talking to your doctor or your psychologist or somebody who specialises in that. So for gay men, it would be, obviously you need an egg, so you're going to need to find an egg donor and a surrogate. And if you are
because they have to be separate, right?
They don't have to be.
Okay.
So the majority of arrangements involve what we call gestational surrogacy, which is where there's a separate egg donor or the intended mother is providing her egg. So the surrogate is not providing the egg. Traditional surrogacy, which is a really strange name, but I think they call it traditional because that was the original surrogacy. And that's where the surrogate conceives with her own egg. And that's only about 15% in Australia, but it is legal. And I was a traditional surrogate. So the little one that I gave birth to shares my genetics, which is amazing. She looks a little bit like me. Yeah. Sometimes I forget that I carried her, except that she reminds me when she just looks at me. And I think, yeah, that's right, she's from me. But yeah, both are legal. So you may have a situation where somebody says, I'd like to be your surrogate and I can do traditional, I'll provide the egg as well, and that's fine. But for the majority, it is finding a surrogate and then separately finding an egg donor. And certainly asking friends and family, sometimes there's a bit of a myth going around that you can't ask somebody to be your surrogate. That's not the case. You absolutely can ask. But you want to think about the etiquette around putting that on somebody's table and saying, please be our surrogate. What you want is that she's offering it freely and that it's an idea that she's thought through and considered. And often I'll hear people say, we put it out there to our friends and family that we were considering surrogacy, and we got 4 people offer and then 3 of them had to fall through because they couldn't really go through with it for any reason. So looking for somebody that can really commit to the process. It may be friends or family. It might be even work colleagues or extended network. You kind of want to share the story and get other people talking about it.
Yeah.
I've heard of arrangements being sort of matched through like school pickups where the mums are chatting and one says, I need a surrogate, and the other one says, well, I'll do that.
Wow.
And things like I had one where a beautician had provided treatment for somebody who needed a surrogate and somebody else who wanted to be a surrogate, and the beautician put them in touch with each other. I just think that's amazing. They've now had 2 children through surrogacy because they met somebody through their beautician. Just go and get your nails done and talk to people about it really is the answer. But yes, the Facebook groups are another place that you might meet somebody. And again, there's Facebook for surrogacy, but also there's a group, Egg Donation Australia, if you're looking for an egg donor, and that's quite a busy little community as well.
Great.
And you're thinking about, in all those cases, you're thinking about, can we have a friendship with this woman and her family? For egg donation, you are going to have a child with her genetics, so this child is always going to have a connection with that person and her children, and if maybe she's been a donor for several other families, you need to sort of think about what those connections are. Most surrogates and egg donors have no interest in kind of being involved in your day-to-day parenting of your child, but they do want to maintain the friendship and the connection. So I see the little one, who's not so little anymore.
How old?
She's 6.5, so she's at school now. We see each other every school holidays. They only live half an hour away. You know, they're looking after our dog this weekend. We celebrate birthdays and Christmas together.
Wow.
And I would say it's as close as maybe auntie and niece and cousins to my kids. That's probably as close as it gets, I guess, with language.
But did you navigate that? Was that something that you navigated together?
Yes, and it has changed a lot over those 6.5 years, because initially, of course, we were seeing each other very regularly when she was little, but they were also finding their way as dads, and I was finding my way not being pregnant anymore. And then I guess as she's grown up and done things like kinder and daycare, and, you know, I've got kids at school and one of them's off at high school, you know, our family commitments and our lives change. So we still catch up pretty regularly, but it has become less about surrogacy and more about the friendship that we have, which I think is really important. We've also had a few little holidays together where we went to chill out up in Dalesford together and hired a big Airbnb, so we were all in the same place.
Love that.
And I noticed that as much as her dads are very close friends, our ongoing relationship is more and more about her connection with my kids and with myself, that we are just always part of her life, so that there's never a question mark about where she came from. And I suspect as she gets older and my kids get older, they'll kind of direct the relationship more than the adults will.
For sure.
We just kind of go naturally.
Yeah.
She's referred to my boys as her brothers, and that's not language we had used initially. We didn't really give language. We just said these are their names. But she said, I love my brothers. I want to spend time with my brothers. And we all thought that was kind of sweet and funny. But it's interesting that that's the language she has chosen, and whether that will stick or whether she'll actually step away from it. Or my kids, they know about the genetic connection. She has knowledge of it, but she doesn't really understand it at this stage.
For sure. And it just sounds like you guys are all just willing to go wherever it goes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's taken a while to get to that point, I think, where we're all just kind of comfortable to let it flow rather than trying to have some sort of set framework of what are we doing here. And I do like the language that I'm her auntie and my partner is uncle.
Yeah.
Other surrogates have said that, you know, not so sure about that language, but that seems to fit with us.
Yes, and it's all individual.
Yeah.
It's whatever works.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm a godparent to a child that I was an egg donor for. And we're not actually religious, but that's the language that their family wanted, so that's fine. Yeah.
So in terms of the law, so you've got the egg donor and then the surrogate that carries. Who's actually seen when that baby is born as How does it work in terms of who is seen as the parent?
So if you have an egg donor, she actually doesn't have any legal rights of parentage when the child is born.
So interesting, given that that's where the genetics come from.
That's where the genetics are.
Yeah.
So actually we have a situation where the egg donor will provide her eggs at the IVF clinic, and the moment that they're fertilised with somebody's sperm, they are no longer hers and she can't withdraw her consent. So they kind of belong to the intended parents themselves, and they can make decisions about using them. There are very strict rules. It depends on the state, but we do want to make sure we keep record of who that donor was so that the child can access that information in the future.
And there is a database where that's all
yes,
kept? Yeah.
In Victoria that's the case. It's a bit different in other states, but the other states are kind of following suit, which means the child could grow up and maybe not know who their egg donor is, but they can go and access records that will tell them a bit about, you know, her name and date of birth, that sort of thing.
At any age?
So at the moment it's actually, I think, 18 in Victoria, and it's facilitated. So they can't just kind of open up a record and find out. They actually have somebody sit down with them and provide them with certain information.
Yeah.
And if they want to make contact with their donor, then that's facilitated through the service as well. It's not just that you can just get their phone number and call them.
Yes.
Yeah. In the most part, though, for egg donation and surrogacy in Australia, we all know each other anyway.
Yes.
So, and particularly for gay couples, the child will know that there was an egg involved and they'll know there was a surrogate involved.
And if they don't, you're in bigger trouble.
Right. You might need to start with the basics of how babies come to be. And so the child will always know. Like the little one that I gave birth to, she knows I carried her in my belly.
Yeah.
I don't think she quite really understands that the genetics, she probably has some understanding that she shares something with my boys. I don't know that she really understands sort of, that the egg was from me. She's been told, but, she's only 6, so it'll never be a mystery, but she'll have more of an understanding as she grows older about what that actually means.
For sure.
Yeah. So, at the birth, what actually happens is that the surrogate is the legal parent. So we have a presumption, and this might apply, for example, for lesbian couples that might be listening, that when somebody gives birth, they are presumed to be the legal parent of the child. So if a woman gives birth and she's used a donor sperm, she's the parent and the donor is not, and her partner is recognised as the other parent. Whereas in surrogacy, the same applies, but you've got a surrogate and her partner are recognised as the legal parents and not the intended parents who are taking that baby home from hospital.
That's so interesting, isn't it?
So the surrogate and her partner are named on the birth registration as the parents. I say to people, but the intended parents can choose baby's full name. That's what goes on the birth registration.
Yeah.
And then the intended parents need to apply for what's called a parentage order in their home state. And that essentially takes parentage from the surrogate and her partner and transfers it over to the intended parents. And then they get a new birth certificate, which lists them as the parents. So again, little one that I gave birth to, her original birth certificate had me and my partner listed as her parents. It was all a bit kind of strange.
The thing that I try to get that I can't get my head around is the partner.
Yeah.
I can understand the reason why the surrogate, whether it's right or wrong, we'll leave that debate for another time. But the partner,
it's a bit odd.
Makes no sense.
And I reckon every week I speak to a surrogate and their partner, and the partner's like, "Wait, what? Why am I on this birth certificate?" Even my partner was like, "Oh, well, there's that daughter I don't remember wanting." Like, it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
And particularly as they've generally not provided the sperm, they've not provided the egg,
This
and
is
they
where
didn't
it's
carry.
crazy.
Why are they on the birth certificate? It does come back to our law presumes that if somebody gives birth, it's their child, and if they have a partner, it's presumed to be their child as well. And when we're transferring parentage, we're doing it from the birth parents to the intended parents. So we have to use both the surrogate and their partner on the birth registration. It's all a bit odd.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's a bit old-fashioned.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, especially as partners would be quite happy not to be on a birth certificate. My partner never felt like any inclination to be on her birth certificate, and neither did I really, but I could understand legally that was required. But him, he's like, process. This is weird. Yeah. And also that she didn't share a last name with him or I. Yeah. So there's a birth certificate with her last name, which is her dad's last name.
Yeah.
She doesn't share last name with my kids or me or my partner. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's just
strange.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, and probably won't get into it, but there would be occasions where that all goes pear-shaped.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, luckily not much.
Yes.
Again, this is why I like doing surrogacy and not divorce law.
Yes, for sure.
People like each other in surrogacy generally, and there will always be complexities in relationships. We're talking about humans doing human things.
This is it, yeah.
That can be really hard. Generally, though, the surrogate's very happy to hand over the baby. So that even if the relationship is broken down with the intended parents or, going through a rough patch, the baby still goes home with them and the legal process still goes pretty smoothly, but it does often involve counselling. There might be lawyers getting involved if necessary. I hate getting involved at that point because lawyers, may not make it better. I always say to people that's where you call the counsellors because lawyers like to make things worse.
Yes.
But the parentage order process will actually go pretty well even if the relationship's not so good.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So back to that step-by-step guide.
Yes. So I think we were talking about the bit. So in terms of a gay couple, they qualify for surrogacy. If they have an egg donor and a surrogate, they can go to an IVF clinic and talk about creating embryos. And they might do that even if they don't have a surrogate. If, for example, they have an egg donor, they can go and create embryos and then still be seeking out a surrogate.
Oh, that's good.
It's a good idea to get legal advice before they do that, though.
Right.
Because there are laws around creating embryos with donor eggs or sperm that may mean that if they create them in a clinic in Australia, they can't move them to another clinic or they can't take them overseas, for example. So it's a good idea to talk to a lawyer at that point.
Yep.
And also that some clinics may not want to create embryos until they have a surrogate lined up. So again, getting legal advice at that point, there may be other options for them.
So it sounds like it would be beneficial if you are going to go, you're serious and you want to go through this process, get in touch with a lawyer from the get-go.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's lots of resources on my website they can read and then book in for the actual legal advice if they need to get some specific questions answered.
Great.
The clinics will do things like egg donor screening. They'll do counselling with the egg donor and the intended parents. If they've then got a surrogate, the first step for her is that she gets medical clearance. And for surrogates in Australia, generally we need them to be over 25. For some states like Victoria and WA, we require them to have had their own children, but for other states that's not a requirement. So I know lots of surrogates in New South Wales and Queensland, for example, who have not had their own kids, but they've been surrogates, and it's amazing. There's no legal reason why they can't do that.
Yeah,
I think
because in Victoria it's something like you have to have completed your family.
They do like to tell you that. Technically, you must have had your own child if you're a surrogate for gestational surrogacy in Victoria. You don't have to have completed your family. If you wanted to have 3 kids after you've been a surrogate, that would be your prerogative.
I mean, how could you stop that?
Yeah, that's right. You go home and have sex with your husband if you want. That's fine.
Yes, yeah.
But it is, I guess, a health question. Like, what happens if the surrogacy pregnancy ends with you needing a hysterectomy? Is that the end of your family?
Okay.
And you might need to think about whether that's a risk you want to take or whether you want to complete your family first. And in terms of having kids, it is a requirement, but I do think from a bodily autonomy perspective, we shouldn't be requiring a surrogate to have had kids. She can make her own informed decisions just like anybody else.
Yeah.
But if she's had medical clearance, then the clinics generally then send them off for counselling with a fertility counsellor, and they're very qualified surrogacy counsellors in Australia that they need to speak to. And then the birth parents will get one lawyer and the intended parents will have a separate lawyer, and we go back and forth with making sure they get the right amount of legal advice. In most states, they draft and sign off on a surrogacy agreement, and then they can go ahead with an embryo transfer once they've completed counselling and legal advice. In Victoria, they have to go through what's called the patient review panel to get approval before they can do the embryo transfer. Yeah. But that's just an extra layer that other states don't do, but everything else is very similar. And then the surrogate can go in and have an embryo transfer, or if they're doing traditional surrogacy, they can actually do the turkey baster thing at home if they prefer. Yeah. But again, they still need to have done all the legals and counselling before they do the pregnancy attempts. And then if she's pregnant, it's just like any other pregnancy in terms of like Medicare and private health. She can choose a hospital. The intended parents can go to appointments and scans with her. Everything that's out of pocket can be covered by the intended parents. But like I say, Medicare actually covers, you know, most public health pregnancies. So I think we went through a public hospital here in Melbourne and the intended parents had a few little out-of-pocket expenses, but mostly it was covered by Medicare.
Yes.
And then at the birth, while the surrogate's obviously delivering the baby and doing all the hard work of labour, the intended parents are generally in the room. Like altruistic surrogates really want them to see the birth of their baby. It's pretty special. And they can do all the baby care stuff, like when baby's born. They can even do things like skin to skin and cutting the cord. The surrogate will obviously, you know, plan for that with them. And every arrangement is a little bit different. And then they can do all the care for bub and take baby from the hospital and go home. And then that's when the legal process kicks in with the birth parents having to register the birth and the intended parents having to apply for the parentage order.
And it's all administrative from that stage.
Yes, it's kind of just a whole lot of paperwork and signing off with lawyers and sending it to court.
Yes.
I'm frustrated with that process because I think it's costly. And if you've done all the counselling and legal advice before conception, making everybody go through another post-birth process that's expensive and time-consuming.
Especially when you've got a new baby.
That's right. Yeah. And I've had clients that are like, they're just so overwhelmed with caring for the baby that adding in a legal process is a lot, especially when they've dropped an income because somebody's at home with bub. It's just silly.
Yes.
I think that a better option is that when they register the birth, they could just do like an extra form to say, this was surrogacy, we all consent, put the intended parents on the birth certificate and it's done. Yes. And it's more administrative and it's over and done with within a day.
Yes.
And most surrogates would be pretty happy not to be on a birth certificate. Like I say, my partner was like, this is not my child.
Yeah.
Why am I on a birth certificate? Why do I have to sign an affidavit?
Just sign here.
Just sign here. That's right. He's like, hurry up. I don't want this child on my, I don't want responsibility for it. Yeah. And it was also upsetting, I know, for my intended parents because we had to wait several months for the parentage order, that they were worried that if one of them died, they wouldn't be recognised as her dad's, or that, just generally if they needed to take her to the doctor, they might not be recognised as her parents. Yeah. And I guess I wasn't too worried at the time because I thought it'd be fine. But that's my privilege speaking because I've never had to justify myself as a parent to my children, and they felt like they were constantly having to kind of show themselves to be her legitimate parent. And once they got the parentage order, they felt more comfortable about that.
So what's the process to get the parenting order? Are we talking weeks, months?
Yeah, it can be. So the paperwork itself varies from state to state. In New South Wales, it's a massive amount of paperwork and extra counselling. Queensland's about the same.
Does the lawyer help with that, or is it just something you...
So lawyers can do that, and particularly for some of the states where it's really complex, lawyers need to be involved, but it's actually not a requirement to have a lawyer. You must have a lawyer pre-conception.
Yeah.
There is no requirement to have a lawyer post-birth. So some people can kind of, do the paperwork themselves, but it's affidavits from everybody, and we send it all off to the court. If we're thinking about the Victorian process, we just send all this paperwork and affidavit material to the court, and then we wait for the judge to make the order, and that could be 3 or 4 months. Sometimes it's even longer. And we don't do much. We're just sitting around waiting, just caring for the baby.
I could imagine that would be anxiety-inducing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've seen intended parents very anxious that the moment the baby's born, they're like, let's do the parentage order right now.
Sure.
And I guess it might come from that just anxiety about, I want to be recognised as the child's parent. It's not usually because they think the surrogate's going to try and keep the baby, but there's some anxiety there.
Add into that no sleep once the baby comes.
Right. Can we just settle the legal paperwork ASAP?
Yeah.
One of the issues we have, though, is that they can't apply until baby is 1 month old. Right. So they have to actually get through the first month and not do much. We can do some paperwork, but you can't actually file it.
Yeah.
And then once the order arrives from the court, it just says essentially that the parentage now sits with the intended parents, and we send that over to births, deaths and marriages, and they reissue the birth certificate, and that can take another couple of weeks.
Right.
So I think the longest I've had was clients that waited through COVID, and their baby had her first birthday and they still hadn't got the parentage order. And so we're talking about a 14, 15-month-old baby and still got the surrogate listed on the birth certificate. That's really problematic.
Yeah.
Particularly it might be things like passports. You can't get a passport without the surrogate's consent, so she needs to sign that. And if one of the intended parents were to die, there's a question mark over, well, what happens with their estate? If they had a will that didn't mention the child, does that mean that actually it's the surrogate's child? What happens if the surrogate dies? Does this child now get to take part of their estate from their siblings? So all sorts of issues there that luckily haven't really come out to play, but they will one day, because we will have a situation where somebody dies before the parentage order is made, and we all have to deal with that situation about who was the legal parent at the time of death.
Yeah. So what's the reasoning behind the child must be 1 month old?
I wonder if it's a cooling off period. Yeah. Just still go and think about it. The intended parents need 30 days to think about whether they want to keep the baby, and the surrogate needs 30 days to think about whether she wants it back. I joke. I don't know that it's that particularly. Maybe it is. It's more to do with needing evidence that the child is living with the intended parents for a period of time before they apply. To establish that they are actually the parents of this child, we need to be able to say they've lived with us since they left the hospital, and everybody sees this baby as our baby. And to do that, we can say, yep, has been living with us for at least 30 days. The surrogate hasn't come knocking since then, and the judge can go, yep, you've established that there was that kind of course of conduct.
Rubber stamp it.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, we've had previously, I've chatted with Luke and Jason and Paul and Glenn, who have all been, they both mentioned you, but both of them highlighted the counselling process and the review panel as being an ordeal.
Yes, absolutely.
In terms of the counselling being super intrusive and almost combative to what they were trying to, that they wanted to be parents, as well as the review panel, being grilled and all of that kind of stuff. Any commentary on that? Yeah,
so certainly the counselling isn't meant to feel intrusive, but I guess when we do counselling, it can feel like somebody's kind of, pulling on a thread to see how far that wound might open.
Yeah.
And really it's meant to be about making sure that everybody is kind of robust enough for surrogacy. Have we talked about the relationship we have with our surrogate or the egg donor? What does this look like in terms of us supporting the surrogate and her family through surrogacy? Because that's pretty hard. And how do we kind of manage our different interests? We've got two people that are really keen to have a baby and somebody else is going to do that work, but we don't live together. So we're not going to be there when she's vomiting in the middle of the night. How do we support her through that? And thinking about, the sort of worst case scenarios where what happens if she miscarries? How are we going to support each other? It's different feelings that are coming up because she might be grieving the pregnancy in a different way to the intended parents.
Yes.
I know one surrogate, for example, who had a miscarriage, and the intended parents were absolutely devastated, and she was more kind of, I guess, not so worried about it because she was also a midwife and she understood that pregnancies end, and she was perhaps not as devastated because she hadn't hoped for the baby in the way that the intended parents had. And it's not because she was heartless, she just had a different experience. But how do we kind of manage that? And so counselling will talk through that. What will happen if the surrogate is on bed rest? How are we going to support her and her family, particularly if we don't live nearby, those sorts of things. So I guess trying to get people to think about just being open to the counselling actually being a support for that process, that, getting us to think about things we hadn't really considered. And then for the patient review panel, over the years, they've had a bad rap, and my experience wasn't always positive, that it did feel like this kind of scrutiny of whether we were good enough to do surrogacy or good enough to be parents, and that's not really what it's meant to be.
Yes.
I guess it's set up by government to make sure that the surrogacy arrangements we're approving have actually met all the criteria, and some people have found that interview process they do with the PRP is quite intrusive, and I've given feedback about some of that. I think these days it's a bit better. But again, we're talking even patient review panel is full of humans doing human things, and we all bring our stuff to those sorts of things.
Who's reviewing all this? So these things are put in place. Who's reviewing it and going, right, is this working? Do we need to change it? Are we having consultations where we're sitting down with all the players in the room and listening to the concerns?
Yeah, there was. So the PRP makeup it changes every couple of years.
Right.
And it is kind of full of lawyers and child protection workers and fertility people and counsellors. So it's a bit of a broad group. But the review actually in 2018, there was the Gorton Review in Victoria, where we all stepped up and gave feedback on what we thought about reproductive treatment in Victoria, particularly around surrogacy and donation, and also then around what our experiences were with the PRP.
Great.
So we did get an opportunity to do that. And again, we're also dealing with a bureaucratic process that I guess my experience of PRP is that they're not always understanding the surrogacy community and people's expectations of it, and people do get really nervous. And I say to them, if you've done all the work in counselling and legals, there's nothing to be nervous about.
Yes.
PRP actually wants them to pass. They want to approve them. But the ones that I've seen where they haven't approved them, there were good reasons why they needed to put a stop to a surrogacy arrangement that maybe even the lawyers and the counsellors didn't realise.
Right. Yeah, good point. Do you know, we've just flown through this, Sarah, and I knew that we would. What is something that is often not considered when undertaking surrogacy as a pathway to parenthood?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for intended parents, thinking about the absolute complexity of what it takes to be a surrogate, that we don't expect two men to know, for example, about menstrual cycles and reproductive health for a woman, but it's not rocket science to know that it takes a hell of a lot of work to be pregnant and to deliver a baby, and that the hormones can cause absolute havoc with her physically and mentally, and that even if she's kind of emotional and a bit all over the place after the birth, that doesn't mean she wants the baby back. Absolutely not. I mean, I remember in the first few weeks after I gave birth, I would just cry for no reason. And at no point did I think I want the baby back. In fact, if anything, I was like, stop giving me the baby. It's kind of freaking me out. These people keep giving me the baby to cuddle, and I was like, why are they I don't want their baby. Why are they doing it? It was really kind of confusing.
Yeah.
But kind of riding that wave together and going.
Is there post-counselling?
For some states there is. Yeah. What I say to people is you absolutely should have post-birth counselling. It's not actually required in Victoria, for example. Yeah. In other states it is. But debriefing the birth, debriefing those first few weeks and months is really important for everybody. I also think for intended parents, they've wanted this so much. Even if they haven't had a long infertility journey, they still have gone through a lot to get to surrogacy, and then watching somebody else carry their baby and trusting in the process and just being a part of it. And then at the end, they have to take a baby home, and nobody stops and says, are you okay?
Yeah.
Because parenting is hard.
So hard.
And as a woman in a hetero relationship, there was kind of checks in, how's Sarah going after she gave birth to her baby? I don't think anybody checked on my intended parents.
Yeah.
And I see examples of other intended parents, particularly dads, that are just kind of shell-shocked about the care of a newborn and how relentless it is.
It's just relentless.
Right? And sometimes it's really hard and it's amazing, but holy shit, there's a reason I didn't have a third child, because it was hard.
Yes. Yeah.
And giving ourselves a bit of grace and permission to find it hard. And it's okay to say, I really, really, really wanted this and I'm finding it hard.
For sure.
I think because we did IVF, I remember feeling after my first son was born, if I struggled, I couldn't tell anybody that because I fought so hard to have him. How could I admit that actually I was finding it tough?
Yeah. I went through the same thing with parenting.
Yeah, that we have to be 100% grateful all the time.
Yes, yeah.
And why do we do that to each other or to ourselves? And giving ourselves permission to say, you could really, really want this, and you could also wake up sometimes and thinking, why did I want this and what have I done?
Yeah.
I don't want to downplay how amazing parenthood is for people that are listening, but
because it is often sugar-coated, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
For everybody. And I think we've done a lot in the world to make it okay for women to ask for help, particularly when they've given birth. We don't do enough of that for people who've done surrogacy or adoption.
Yes.
And that includes men and women. But even like my partner was a bit shell-shocked after the birth of our first child. Nobody asked him if he was okay.
Yeah.
He told me about it. He didn't talk to anybody else about it. Yeah.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
Sarah, I want to thank you for coming and chatting with us today. Before we log off, how could somebody get in touch with you?
So easiest way is on the website, which is just sarahjefford.com. And if you can't remember that, just Google Sarah Jefford. And they can contact me by email, but they may actually find a lot of the resources on the website will answer their questions. There's like a free surrogacy handbook, which is just like 10 pages on how surrogacy works in Australia. There's heaps of articles on the blog. You can start listening to my podcast,
yes,
Surrogacy
for sure.
Podcast.
Yeah, plug it.
And you can actually listen like based on surrogates' experiences or intended parents' experiences. There's a few professionals I've spoken to as well. And just kind of, I guess, absorb yourself in surrogacy in Australia and what it looks like. I also obviously talk to people who are going overseas, and if you're doing that, it's a good idea to get some advice before you choose your country or agency or clinic. And thinking really, regardless of how you're going to do it, what are your values and what are you hoping for? Because many people will come to it and think, I just want to have a baby. But if we're involving an egg donor and a surrogate and an agency and a clinic in an overseas country or an Australian system, thinking about what is it that you value and the sort of person that you want to connect with as a surrogate. Is it somebody that's a bit like an auntie, or do you want a bit more arm's length? And are you okay with somebody that lives in Townsville while you live in Sydney? Like, how are we going to manage that? And then don't feel like you have to accept every offer of an egg donation or a surrogate. I have seen it where intended parents will receive an offer from somebody and they feel like they should just be grateful for the offer, even if they're thinking she might not be right for us. And we may be even getting sort of red flags on some of the things she's saying. It's totally okay to say having a baby is amazing, but it's not the only thing, or we shouldn't be doing it at all costs.
At all costs, yeah, for sure.
There are other options. In fact, if you say no to one offer because it wasn't right, there's a good chance it'll open up a door somewhere else that might be the best option for you.
Wonderful advice. I think you're an absolute champion.
Thank you.
And we're just so grateful for you coming and chatting with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Sarah.